Hello everybody, it's just me today, George. Jack's busy in the workshop screen printing our next batch of 40 Carrooka boards. In this video I'm going to explain and clarify the rules of Carrooka. Everything I'm going to talk about is included in your how to play book, which was with your Carrooka board, but I'm going to go into some perhaps some more complex situations in more detail, and it's going to be really helpful if you're playing very seriously and competitively, or if you're going to be entering our World Championships, which is happening later this year at the end of September. Just to get into the flow of things, I'm going to start with a really brief overview of the basics, and then we're going to look at some more particular situations in more detail. Okay, let's have a quick whiz through the basics of Carrooka. You probably know this already, and even if you've never played Carrooka before, if you know how to play snooker, you're 90% of the way there, because the majority of rules, or at least the aim of the game, is the same. So, little guided tour to the board. You're going to set the board out like this, with all the reds in the middle, the colours on their relevant spots. This line here is called the break line. It's where you're going to start with your striker counter. It's also where you replace the striker to if it's potted at any point in the game. Be anywhere you like on the break line as long as you're touching it. This line is called the margin line. It exists because if the striker lands hard against the edge, the only time you can move the striker counter is to push it forward just a little bit so you can get your finger behind. But I'm going to talk in more detail about the striker in a moment. So the object of Carrooka is to score as many points as possible by getting the counters into the pockets. All counters are worth points. Little bit of terminology here. Your turn is called your break. Your break continues whilst you're potting valid counters, and it finishes as soon as you miss a pot or if you foul. Then play goes to your opponent. Your break always starts by trying to pot a red counter. So let's open the pack at the start of the game. Okay, I didn't get any red counters into pockets there. So my break finishes because I didn't pot anything at all, and play passes to my opponent. So if you pocket a red, you then earn the right to nominate a higher valued coloured counter. Now, once you've nominated the colour, that's got to be the first counter that you hit. If you hit anything else first, or if you pocket anything else, that would be a foul shot. So the only one I can see here is the blue. So I'm going to try and pocket that blue counter. And I missed. So my break ends with a score of 1 for that red. Reds stay off the board. Now, if I had just pocketed that blue just then, it would go back onto its blue spot. And my break would continue by trying to pot another red. I pocketed that red. So I've earned the right to nominate a colour, and I am going to try and pot that yellow. Okay, so play continues like this, taking turns until all of the red counters have come off the board. At that stage, you've got one more chance to nominate the colour of your choice. After that counter has been potted, you're then going to pot the colours in points ascending value. So that's yellow for 2 points, green for 3, brown for 4, blue for 5, pink for 6 and black for 7. It is possible for the game to end early. So for example, if player 1 has a score of 50 points and player 2 has a score of 20 points and it's the end game, so there's no reds left on the table, player 2 couldn't possibly catch up with player 1 because there's only 27 points left on the board. So like I say, it's possible to end the game early, unless of course you want to play it out to the end. There's loads and loads of foul shots to trip you up along the way, and if you foul, you're going to give your opponent a bonus shot, so they get an extra shot to play in their next break. So fouls include missing altogether, pocketing the striker. As I said, that goes back onto the break line if that happens. If you hit one of the other counters when you're aiming for a red, that's a foul. If you pocket another colour counter when you're aiming for a red, that's a foul. If you touch another counter before the one you've nominated, it's a foul. If you make a counter jump and leave the board, that's a foul. And if you massively jerk the board when you're rotating it, which can sometimes make the counters go in, then that can also be a foul. So best to avoid the fouls, but if you do foul, you give your opponent a bonus shot. Your bonus shot carries through your break. So, for example, my opponent's just fouled, and I pop the red on my first shot. So I score 1 point for that. I'm going to nominate the black. And I got the black, so I've got 7 points for that. So that's 8 in total. And then back onto a red. I missed that, but I've still got my bonus shot, so I can have another go at it. So I've got that one. So I'm on to a score of 9. I'm going to nominate the blue. I've got that. So I'm on to a score of 14 and I'm back to a red. Let's try for a risky Carrooka. Okay, I didn't pocket anything there, so play passes to my opponent. Now, if I were using my bonus shot on a colour, and I miss it on the first shot, so say I've just pocketed my red on my first shot and I nominate black and I miss it, I have to use my bonus shot on the same colour that I went for to start with. So I have to go for black again. Oh, by the way, if you pot a coloured counter, say I've just potted this black, and you go to put it back onto its spot and its spot is covered by another counter, then you're going to place it on the highest available spot. Now in this instance it's the blue, because the pink is also covered. So I'm going to put it on the blue spot. Had the blue and the yellow also been covered at that point, then I would return the coloured counter to as close behind the spot as possible without actually touching the colour that's obstructing it on the margin side. Oh, one other thing I'm often asked about, or not often asked about because it doesn't happen very often, but I have been asked about, is what do you do if a counter lands like that on its edge? Now really there's two things you can do. One is you can leave it there until the situation resolves itself naturally, because it's likely to fall down at some point, or you can just flip it down as close to where the edge of it was when it landed, and play continues as normal. Another thing that we're asked about occasionally is what happens if you pot 2 reds at the same time. That's absolutely fine. It's not a foul, and actually you score 2 points, 1 for each of the reds. I did say I would talk a little bit more about the margin line. Now, as I said before, the margin line exists so that if the striker lands hard against the edge, it's the one time you can physically move the striker, is you can push it forward. It must still be touching the margin line, just so you can get your finger behind it. Same is true if it lands over a pocket like that. You can push it forward so that you can just get your finger behind it. That's all nice and straightforward. We have seen occasionally people move in the other direction over the pocket, and that's not allowed. So it needs to be straight out from where it lands, the shortest distance, so that you can get a finger behind it still. Occasionally, you might find that you're slightly obstructed by a counter in front of it. Now in this situation, it's okay to just go slightly to the side so you're not touching that red, but you're as close to as possible. Same, if you landed over a pocket like this and you've got an obstructing counter here, you can come round to the side so that you're not touching that red. What you cannot do is decide that there's a nice tasty shot this way and come all the way around here, or a cracking line that way and go over there. It's always got to be the shortest possible distance forward. Hopefully I've covered pretty much all of the basics, but we're going to have a look at in detail at a few other areas. So let's start with flicking. You can use any style of flick that you like, as long as it's one finger and as long as it's a clean flick and not a push shot. You cannot be in contact with the striker once it's moving. Some people, including me, flick off the table like this. Others use a thumb flick like that. Some just aim. I can't do that one. I find off the table works best. But you'll find what's most comfortable for you and what works best for you. I'll give you one handy little tip, which is if you're trying to pot a counter and you're hampered by other counters, so you can't get your finger in behind the striker without touching these, which would be a foul, using the lines on top of the striker can work really, really well and does count as a valid shot as long as, like I say, it's a nice, clean flick, like that. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about board rotation. While it's your break, you're in charge of the board and nobody else can touch the rail. And this is because it's actually possible to foul whilst you're turning the board. So in normal play, you can actually turn quite quickly, but you do want to be gentle on the start and stop of each rotation, on the acceleration and braking, if you like. And that's because if you jerk it, the counters can move. Now, this does happen occasionally by accident in normal play, and it's normally not a problem. You're just going to agree to leave the counters where they are. But it could be that you've jerked it so much that you've made a counter go into a pocket. That would be a foul shot, and play would go straight back to your opponent without you flicking any counters at all. So just take a little bit of care with the board rail. Make sure you're the only person touching it when it's your go, and everything will be fine. Still with me? You're doing really well. I promise you we're nearly there. It's a good moment though to talk about the free counter rule. And if you are a snooker player, you'll probably already be familiar with this. So if your opponent fouls, and that's the crucial bit, because this only applies when you're playing following a foul shot, and if you're carrookaed, so you can't see a direct path to any valid object counter, then the free counter rule applies. So in a free counter situation, there's three possibilities. You can pick up the striker and play from anywhere you like on the break line. You can make your opponent play instead of you, or you can nominate another counter. So let's just have a little look at some of those options. And I'm going to take a load of counters off here because it's a situation that's more likely to happen during the end game. So when you're getting close to the end and there's basically fewer shots available to you because there's fewer counters on the board. So let's have a look at this. So my opponent has just fouled, so they have missed completely. And I can't see both sides of that red counter. So that means technically I'm carrookaed. Actually, I could just clip it. I could even maybe come off the rail and hit it. But I have the option to do other things with it because my opponent's just fouled. So in 90% of situations, picking up the striker and placing it anywhere you like on the break line is going to solve your problem for you. Okay? So you carry on as normal, playing out your shot and with your bonus. But say that wasn't the case. Say that this was what you were left with. So if I pick up the striker here and put it on the break line, I still don't have a pot available to me anywhere at all. So that's really not going to help me out. So in this situation, I could nominate my opponent to play instead of me. So I could make them, basically force them into a foul shot. There is still a little option for coming off that rail and hitting that red. So maybe in this situation, what I want to do is is to nominate another counter. So what I do in a nomination situation is I leave the striker where it is and I nominate another colour to play instead of the red. So in this situation, I am going to nominate the blue. Okay, now I score 1 point for that blue because it was being a red. I continue my shot as normal, so I'm now on to a colour, because even though I put it a blue, it was technically being a red. Now, I want to be able to get onto the red after I put this colour, so you're going to have to think about that. But I haven't got an awful lot on here, so I'm going to go for the pink, which I missed, but I did free up the red a little bit. So you can see how that works to get you out some very tricky situations, and hopefully I've explained it all clearly enough for you. Okay, that's about it. I think I've covered most of the basics and some of the more detailed rules of Carrooka. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. You'll probably abandon most of the details when you're playing a relaxed game with friends after dinner. But if you're seriously competing, then the devil's in the detail. And we think that you'll find Carrooka more challenging if you are playing by the exact rules. We'll do our best to film some more whole games with me and Jack playing and explaining a little bit as we go, so you can see us playing by our own rules. But for now, I think that's probably it. So, yeah, happy flicking.